In the shadow of the great geographical discoveries and the golden age of colonization, a dark and little-studied page of history is hidden. This is the story of how the wealth of America turned into a curse for its indigenous peoples. How great civilizations flourished on these lands for millennia, were devastated and conquered by foreign invaders. In this video, we will reveal the history of the colonization of America from the point of view of those who lost everything, but how several hundred conquistadors were able to subjugate entire empires and what was the real price of gold and wealth exported to Europe. How, in fact, the Spanish colonization of America began in general, of course, with the Italian Christopher Columbus, who completely accidentally discovered America. Being absolutely confident in the discovery of the western route to India, this happened in the glorious year for the Spaniards and terrible for the Indians in 1492. After all, it was in this year that, with the joint efforts of the United Kingdom of Castile and Leon, as well as the Kingdom of Aragon, the Granadan emigrant was captured. The Reconquista lasted almost 8 years. Centuries finally ended with the victory of the Catholic kings and the expulsion of Muslims beyond the Iberian Peninsula. The indigenous population of America in the same year faced those who would later destroy their civilization. What could have been the main reasons for colonization? First of all, of course, economic factors. Initially, Spain sought to continue displacing the Moors from the territory of North Africa. However, faced with the problems of this enterprise, the lack of obvious advantages and strong resistance from Muslims, the Spaniards turned their attention to the recently discovered territories in America. Especially after it became known about the riches of the American lands, Spanish conquerors began to spread stories about the legendary El Dorado and Poitiers, abounding in gold and silver. During the 15th century, the Spanish kingdoms were actively moving towards unification into one powerful state, which was ultimately achieved thanks to the so-called union of the Catholic kings Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile, which provided a unified political strategy for the independent kingdoms. This dynastic union lasted until 1640 under the Habsburgs. The Spanish Empire became one of the most powerful states both in Europe and throughout the world. And what is required for any empire is constant growth and the capture of resources. And where were these resources found? Namely in America. Thus, the fate of the indigenous peoples of America was predetermined in the plans of the foreign policy of the Spanish rulers. There was another important aspect. During the era of the Reconquista in Spain, a whole class of militant defenders of Christianity from Muslims, knights known as hidalgos and caballeros, emerged. They, in simple terms, made their fortune in the war by being murderers and robbers. After the final liberation of Spanish possessions from all undesirable elements, noble knights wandered around doing nothing, gradually becoming impoverished, clearly bored, and looking for new adventures. This situation created risks for the stability of Spain. In this regard, the question arose: why not send dissatisfied warriors away from home while pursuing the interests of the crown? This is what they did. At the same time, the population of the Iberian Peninsula gradually increased. There was not enough suitable land for everyone. And the Spanish Inquisition showed an unhealthy interest in some individuals. There were also other potential candidates for colonists in addition to the already mentioned groups of the Spanish population. After the completion of the Reconquista, the lands of the Muslims were divided between the main beneficiaries and the successfully settled knights. The land, in accordance with a long-standing tradition and law, was inherited by the eldest son. According to an equally ancient tradition, the knights had even more sons, respectively. Younger sons were often left out in the cold. And since there were many such lands, there were also enough disadvantaged children, and many of them had no choice but to rob and pillage on busy roads and in villages. Or they tried their luck across the Atlantic Ocean. All these social strata characteristic of medieval Spain found their application in the Age of Discovery, becoming the basis for the class of conquistadors. And who are these conquistadors of yours? It's simple. After all, conquistadors are understood to be the Spanish and Portuguese conquerors of territory in the New World. These are the people moving the colonization of America forward. Participants in the conquest of the New World. These are the brave ruffians paved the way for their homeland to wealth, glory, and prosperity. Well, the Indians who stood in their way were simply unlucky. When Columbus sailed to Haiti, he suddenly decided to rename it Hispaniola, as if shouting, "Here you go, guys, mini Spain," and immediately, without wasting time, he made the first colony, Navidad, as if foreshadowing future holidays for the Spaniards and a headache for the locals. Soon, a city was founded there, which became a springboard for the subsequent conquest of the entire island, and of course, a party of interests with the locals immediately began, only instead of fireworks, there were conflicts. Then, the Spanish conquistadors, without losing enthusiasm, took up Puerto Rico, Jamaica, and the Isthmus of Panama, which they called nothing less than Golden Castile, clearly hinting at their modest intentions, and Cuba. Oh, and she, too, did not abandon the Spanish love of conquest. The first stage of colonization was successfully completed. And that means the time has come for new greats. While conquering new territories, the invaders became unrivaled masters of the three. They plundered, oppressed, and suppressed any emerging protest with the same enthusiasm with which children take apart a construction set. They dismantled cities and villages, and did so with such cruelty that even the Vikings would have given a standing ovation. In pursuit of treasure, our heroes never missed a chance to appropriate a little more land for themselves. Believing in the words of Columbus, gold is everything. It builds ships and sends them in search of new lands. And if you have gold, you're a wizard, you can do whatever you want, even open the way to paradise. But it seems no one has figured out how exactly gold helps with the last point. Apart from buying indulgences, when talking about the conquest of America by the Spaniards and other Europeans, it should be borne in mind that there was virtually no war in the usual sense of the word, and there could not have been. How could the locals respond to the Spanish with rifles and cannons? Correctly, with bows, wooden spears with charred tips, and shields made of branches, which at best could protect against sunburn, but not against bullets. Tactically, the Indians were in the same position as a man who came to a duel with a dagger against a tank. Moreover, as it turned out, nothing struck the Indians as much as the sight of a Spaniard on horseback. There were no horses in America before the arrival of Europeans, so a Spaniard sitting on such an unprecedented and therefore terrifying animal as a horse and controlling it seemed to the Indians like some kind of god. And they simply could not offer serious resistance to the aliens. It was the cavalry, allowing for quick maneuvers, that ensured the decisive superiority of the Spaniards. The famous conquistador Cortés had 600 soldiers at his disposal, but quickly captured the Aztec capital a little later. Another conquistador, Pizarro, with a detachment numbering only 168 people, defeated the Incas, who had an army of many thousands. And now we smoothly switch to the history of Hernando Cortés, probably the brightest star in the conquistador firmament. The guy was not born in a golden cradle, but in a modest hut. The Hidalgo spent his youth in the style of living brightly, chasing adventures and dreaming of the glory of a warrior, like the main character in a blockbuster about the New Age, dreaming of the glory of a warrior, like the main character in a blockbuster about the New Age, dreaming of following the path of Columbus, who had recently made his first voyage. Cortés arrived in Haiti in 1504 to the shores of the Antilles, where after acquiring a small estate, after 7 years, deciding that it was time to tighten up his finances, he went to Cuba. There, he became famous not only as a champion storyteller, but also as almost the main antagonist of the local Indians, suppressing in the bud any of their attempts at rebellion after Cuba surrendered under his pressure. Cortés acquired land and gold mines quite quickly. He soon amassed a decent fortune, earned, as he put it, at the expense of countless Indian lives. In 1518, Cortés led an expedition to capture Mexico, which was inhabited at that time by the powerful Aztecs. The Aztec civilization was then at the peak of its prosperity. Less than a century had passed since the first of the great Aztec rulers, Itzcoatl, founded the Union of Three Cities, the capital of which was the city of Tenochtitlan, today's Mexico City. Travel within the city often had to be by water, and in the middle of the Aztec capital there was a gigantic ritual center with many temples and altars where the great temple solemnly towered over all the buildings. In 1519 Cortés arrived on the shores of the Bay of Campeche, quickly beat the locals in chess without rules and moved to the northwest, where he laid the foundation for Veracruz, which became a kind of lair for the future adventures of the conquistadors. Cortés soon realized that he had not just ended up in the thick of the Aztec Empire, which in terms of steepness gave odds to everything the Spaniards had seen in the Antilles. Realizing that force could not win here, Cortés decided to play smart. As it turned out, the Aztecs had enough ill-wishers among their neighbors. So they quickly made friends with the local tribes ready to do anything for revenge on the Aztecs. The fact is that every city subject to the Aztecs had to pay tribute to the ruler of Tenochtitlan. The payment of such tribute was associated with great hardships in the provincial cities themselves, which caused serious uprisings that were brutally suppressed by the Aztec army. Because it is not surprising that the population of many cities burdened with exorbitant taxes joyfully welcomed the Spanish conquerors and even helped them destroy their hated masters. Montezuma, the supreme leader of the Aztecs, realizing the tragedy of the situation, tried to bribe the Spaniards so that they would abandon the campaign against his capital. But the more gold and jewels he gave the conquistadors, the more they strove to seize Tenochtitlan.